If I were 25 again in 2026 with no reputation, no Berkshire, no float, and no pile of capital already working for me, I would not spend my days asking the internet how to get rich. I would ask a different question: what is the shortest, honest path from selling my time to owning a machine? That is the real divide. Most people do not understand that nearly every money-making idea belongs in one of two worlds. In the first world, you are spending energy to create cash that stops the moment you stop. In the second world, you are building something that can keep producing. After today, labor is finished. The first world is not useless. It is where most people must begin. The mistake is staying there too long, or worse, wasting your early years inside schemes that never had any chance of becoming a machine in the first place. I have never admired schemes. I admire businesses. I admire cash flows. I admire ownership. I admire situations where one good decision made today keeps paying for years because it was attached to a system rather than to a mood. That is why if I were starting now, I would sort every opportunity into 4 buckets: the garbage bucket, the easy cash bucket, the skill and systems bucket, and the asset bucket. Most people never build wealth because they keep moving in the wrong direction through those buckets. They begin in garbage because it sounds easy. Then they hop from one mediocre shortcut to another. Then they become exhausted, cynical, and suspicious of every real opportunity because the fake ones consume so much emotional energy. That is how people become older without becoming stronger. I want the opposite. I want a path where each stage teaches the next one. I want a path that begins with cash but does not end with cash. I want a path that eventually produces equity, distribution, recurring revenue, and ownership. That is the only path that has ever really interested me. So let us begin where most people should not stay. The garbage bucket. There are always activities that survive because human beings prefer hope to arithmetic. The labels change. The mechanism does not. In one era, it is NFTs. In another, it is meme coins. In another, it is a new retail trading cult dressed in screenshots and swagger. Then there is day trading for people who do not even understand why the professionals love the other side of their enthusiasm. Then there is multi-level marketing, where people pretend the product matters, even though the structure tells you plainly that recruitment is the real engine. Then there is low-level data entry at the very moment software can do it faster, cheaper, and with no need for lunch breaks or encouragement. Then there are the microtask farms where people perform digital crumbs for wages too small to change a life and too dead and to build a skill moat. Then there is print on demand in its laziest form, where millions of people are all trying to sell nearly identical shirts, mugs, and slogans with no brand, no distribution advantage, and no reason for a customer to care which store he chose. What unites all of these things is not that no one ever makes $1. A few people always do. What unites them is that they usually fail the serious test. Do they build advantage? Do they build trust? Do they build skill? Do they build customer relationships? Do they build proprietary systems? Do they build ownership? Do they build repeatable economics? Most of the garbage bucket answers no. That is why I would stay out. The public consistently confuses visible motion with economic value. If something looks fast enough, enough people assume it must be alive. That is not how I think. If an opportunity depends on new suckers arriving faster than old participants become disappointed, I am not interested. If the economics work only during mania, I am not interested. If software is obviously eating the category, I am not interested. If the customer switching cost is zero and the competitors are endless, I am not interested. That is not because I am a pessimist. It is because I respect time. A person beginning from zero does not have infinite years to waste on fashionable dead ends. The real tragedy of garbage opportunities is not only that they lose money. Many do. The deeper tragedy is that they consume the exact years when a person could have been building real leverage. A 23-year-old can survive losing $500. What he cannot easily get back is 2 years spent in digital junkyards that taught him almost nothing useful about customers, operations, sales, systems, or ownership. Time badly directed is more expensive than money badly spent. That is one of the oldest truths in business. So the first rule is very simple. If the thing is obviously shrinking, obviously being automated away, obviously dependent on hype, or obviously easier to lose money in than to make money in, leave early, leave without nostalgia. Leave without telling yourself that maybe you will be the exception. The exception is not a strategy. Now let us move to the first bucket that is actually worthwhile, the easy cash bucket. I do not mean easy in the sense that you can stay in bed and the money will arrive because you manifested hard enough. I mean easy in the structural sense, low barriers to entry, fast feedback, simple skill sets, quick path to first dollars. That matters a great deal. A person starting from zero does not need a philosophy seminar. He needs proof. He needs to learn that a stranger will pay for something he can actually deliver. That is a profound emotional shift. The first honest online dollar matters more than most people think because it replaces fantasy with evidence. Now the opportunities in this bucket will change at the margin, but the underlying pattern stays stable. There are always businesses and creators who need more output than they can personally produce. There are always people who need content cut down, words improved, questions answered, calendars managed, leads filtered, or simple automations installed. Right now that includes short-form video editing, simple social content systems, AI-assisted copywriting, AI chatbot setup, AI receptionist workflows, virtual assistant work for serious operators, and content coordination for brands that need more volume than they can manage internally. What I like about this bucket is not the glamour. There is very little glamour in it. What I like is the clarity. A small business owner does not care whether you sound sophisticated. He cares whether you save him time, save him labor, help him get more customers, or remove a headache he is already paying for somewhere else. That is what a beginner needs to learn. The market does not pay for your effort by itself. It pays for relief. It pays for solved problems. It pays for outcomes. That is why I would never tell a beginner to sell hours. If he can possibly help it, hours are a weak product. No one wakes up eager to buy hours. What they buy is a result that matters enough to them to exchange money for it. The beginner who learns this early saves himself years of underpricing and confusion. If I were helping someone start in this bucket, I would tell him to do 3 things. First, pick one painful problem that businesses already understand. Not a futuristic problem that requires 10 minutes of explanation before the prospect even knows why he should care. A present pain, too many inbound calls unanswered. Not enough short-form content from existing long-form content, too much repetitive admin work, too many leads ignored. Weak conversion from inquiries, social content that is inconsistent and therefore useless. Second, package the service around the result. Do not say, I edit videos, say I turn one long form recording into 15 clean clips. Your brand can post within 48 hours. Do not say I write copy, say I build and schedule 30 days of educational and sales content so your audience hears from you consistently without your team stopping everything else. Do not say I set up AI, say I build the system that answers common customer questions, captures leads, and frees your staff from repeating the same conversations every day. The result should be clear enough that the buyer knows what pain is leaving the room if he hires you. Third, create a habit of outbound contact. One good outreach a day is enough to change a life if it continues long enough. That sentence sounds too small until you understand compounding in sales. 365 attempts per year, done with reasonable clarity and persistence, is an enormous amount of surface area for luck to operate on. The world constantly teaches people to wait until they feel ready. I prefer action that teaches readiness. Readiness is often the result of repetition, not the prerequisite for it. Now, the danger of this easy cash bucket is obvious. A person gets some money coming in and mistakes it for the finish line. He becomes a freelancer with a slightly better month. He gets addicted to task income. He works very hard. He is pleased with the first 5,000 or 10,000 per month and never asks the more important question. What is here that can scale without me? That question is what separates a good month from a durable machine. The easy bucket is for proof, not for permanent residence. If you stay too long, you can make decent money and still build nothing that can be sold, delegated, or detached from your body. I do not dislike body-based income. I simply refuse to confuse it with ownership. You do not get rich because this month was busy. You get rich because the structure you built can keep working when you are not directly holding every screw in place. That is why the next bucket matters so much, the skill and systems bucket. This is where a person stops being merely useful and starts becoming strategically useful. That difference is important. When you are merely useful, you perform the task. When you are strategically useful, you influence revenue, customer growth, client acquisition, retention, time savings at scale, or some other result that the business can easily connect to money. That is when your pricing power changes. That is when retainers begin to make sense. That is when the relationship with the customer starts moving from contractor to partner. Now, the examples here are not mysterious AI automation agencies that genuinely save labor, reduce repetitive tasks, and improve business throughput. Content agencies that do not merely produce assets, but produce measurable attention and lead flow. LinkedIn growth systems that help a founder or executive generate trust conversations and opportunity at scale. Micro software businesses that solve one specific painful problem and charge every month for it. Motion design and premium brand media for companies where Polish actually translates into conversion or authority. These things are not valuable because they use modern vocabulary. They are valuable when they become tied to measurable business outcomes. That is always the hidden rule. The public falls in love with tools. I fall in love with economics. I do not care that AI is involved unless the economics improve. If the tool saves labor, shortens response time, raises output, increases margin, or improves conversion. Now I care, otherwise it is still mostly theater. This bucket is where you learn the real discipline of business case studies, systems, repeatability, retainers, hiring, delegation, quality control, client selection, margins. That is a much more serious education than most people get from the internet when they are still hopping around the garbage bucket. And I like it because it begins teaching the habit that matters for the next stage. Move from labor to process, move from custom chaos to structured delivery, move from getting paid for an act to getting paid for a result. The person who learns this well becomes very dangerous in the best possible way, because once he can repeatedly create an outcome, he is no longer just a worker. He is getting close to operator status. Operator status matters because operators see where the machine can be detached from the body. That detachment is the opening to ownership. I want to dwell here for a moment because this is where many people still get lost. They think systematizing means making work feel corporate. Number systematizing means making value reliable. A business that depends on one tired genius is not a strong business. It is a fragile one wearing a heroic story. I have no interest in heroic stories when I can have durable cash flows. If a service depends on every hour of your presence, the next step is to standardize. If it can be standardized, the next step is to delegate pieces. If pieces can be delegated, the next step is to turn the whole thing into a productized service or software process. That is how a labor hustle begins becoming a machine. And because so few people stay focused long enough to do this, the rewards can be quite large. Now, before we enter the hardest bucket, let me talk about the disease that destroys more internet businesses than bad luck ever could. Shiny object syndrome. People mock this phrase because it sounds soft and almost childish. It is not childish. It is one of the most expensive psychological disorders in entrepreneurship. A person begins one path after a few rough months. It no longer feels fresh enough to flatter his identity. Now another video appears, another guru, another niche, another industry, another trend, another promise that this next thing is cleaner, faster, more scalable, less competitive, more aligned, more future-proof, more magical. So he resets. That is the word that matters. He resets. Resetting is usually the hidden form of quitting that ambitious people prefer because it lets them preserve self-esteem. They tell themselves they are pivoting. Often they are merely refusing to endure the boring middle where skill, trust, and process would finally have begun compounding. I have known people who spent 10 years restarting, always intelligent enough to sound promising, never consistent enough to become dangerous. That is the real cost of shiny object syndrome. It protects the ego while starving the future. The beginner says this niche is crowded. I should switch. The next one says this takes too long. I should switch. The next one says this requires more sales than I expected. I should switch. The next one says now AI changed everything. I should switch. The real issue is usually that the person never stayed in one lane long enough to earn compounding from knowledge. Trust referrals, systems, and reputation. The internet is now full of people teaching speed who have never built duration. I prefer duration. That is why if I were starting now, I would make one commitment. 1,000 days. Not because the number is magical, because it is long enough to move past mood and enter identity. A man who commits to a serious path for 1,000 days is no longer auditioning for discipline. He either becomes disciplined or he discovers he never really wanted the life. Both outcomes are clarifying. I like clarity. 3 years is long enough for reputation to begin forming, long enough for customers to talk to each other, long enough for a content system to begin paying you back, long enough for a small software product to show whether it has any real demand, long enough for an operator to build a team and stop doing everything alone, long enough for a boring business to show its real economics instead of its launch. Day costume, long enough for compounding to move from invisible to undeniable. The people who win are not always the most brilliant at the beginning. They are the ones who remain in the lane through the phase where the outside world cannot yet tell whether anything is happening. That phase destroys most people. It is also the phase that creates nearly all durable success. Now let us enter the hard bucket. This is the asset bucket. This is where real leverage begins. Not leverage in the debt sense, leverage in the ownership sense. Software equity stakes, acquiring small cash flow businesses and modernizing them, building an audience that can distribute products and opportunities at scale, subscription communities with actual retention and real value, licensing, intellectual property, systems, workflows, and operating playbooks, angel investing in founders with real edge, not in fantasies dressed as innovation. This bucket is harder because it asks for more of everything: more patience, more judgment, more capital or social capital, more operating skill, more willingness to think in years rather than in client invoices. But it is also the only bucket that can realistically produce very large asymmetry, because once you own the machine, the economics change. Now the question is not how many hours you worked this month. It is how many units were sold, how many users stayed, how many contracts renewed, how much software revenue recurred, how much operating income the business threw off after the improvements were made, how much the equity became worth, how much the system distributed without needing your constant physical presence. That is a completely different life. The public constantly confuses income with wealth. I do not. Income can be very high and still disappear every month because it has no durable structure behind it. Wealth begins when the machine has memory, when the efforts of last year keep paying this year, when the customer can buy again, when the subscription renews, when the software bill recurs, when the brand keeps attracting attention because content installed a distribution system, when the business can be sold because it exists independently enough from the founder's daily touch to have enterprise value. That is why the hard bucket matters so much. It is where time finally begins losing some of its dictatorship. You are no longer only trading hours. You are building or owning systems that can continue. Now people hear this and get carried away. They think the answer is to skip straight to the hard bucket, that is ego. You cannot own what you do not understand. You cannot scale what you cannot yet sell. You cannot delegate what you have never learned to deliver. That is why the buckets matter. The right path is usually sequential. Avoid the garbage. Use the easy bucket to get first dollars and learn customers. Use the middle bucket to tie your work to outcomes and build systems. Then move into the hard bucket where systems become assets. That is a sane ladder. Skipping the ladder usually means building castles without stairs. They look pretty in your own imagination. No one can live in them. I have another reason for liking the hard bucket, and it is not talked about enough: optionality. A person with only wage income has very little optionality. A person with client income has more, but still limited. A person with software revenue, equity, distribution, or ownership in a boring cash flow business has begun creating options that did not exist before. He can sell, he can borrow against productive value in some cases. He can hire faster, he can reinvest at higher velocity, he can walk away from bad relationships because the whole structure no longer depends on one paycheck or one client. Optionality is one of the finest forms of wealth. It rarely photographs well. It changes lives. This is why I have always preferred businesses that look dull to the public but beautiful to the owner. The public wants storytelling. I want recurring revenue. The public wants drama. I want low churn. The public wants revolutionary products. I want customers who come back every month because the business solved a boring recurring pain. There is immense wealth in boredom if the boredom is economically necessary. Plumbing is boring. Storage is boring. Waste removal is boring. Payroll software is boring. Maintenance is boring. Scheduling systems are boring. Reception coverage is boring. Lead qualification is boring. Lots of beautiful fortunes came from boring problems that kept returning on schedule. The world teaches people to chase excitement. I would rather own the toll bridge, that is the whole thing. Now let me describe the real progression I would want for a young person starting from zero in 2026. First, reject garbage without apology. No day trading fantasies because some stranger on a rented Lamborghini account made it look elegant. No NFT cemetery tours, no pretending data entry will be a career after software already ate the category. No building your identity around old internet myths that are now mostly crowded junkyards. Second, pick one simple service tied to a clear, painful result and sell it. Maybe it is short-form repurposing for businesses that already create long-form content. Maybe it is AI receptionist setup for local businesses losing calls. Maybe it is copy systems for companies whose founders hate writing. Maybe it is virtual assistants for operators who are suffocating in admin. The exact service matters less than the economics. Solve pain, get paid, do it again. Third, turn the service into a process. Document it. Measure it, price it by outcome when possible. Retain clients monthly when the result is continuous. Remove custom chaos. Fourth, build a small team or system around the service so the first layer of leverage appears. Fifth, use the cash, the customer insight, and the repetition to identify what can become software. Subscription, licensing, or ownership. Sixth, keep making content around the whole process because content is no longer just entertainment. It is distribution. Distribution reduces customer acquisition costs. Distribution attracts talent. Distribution brings deal flow. Distribution becomes its own asset. If you stay with it long enough, that last point matters more in 2026 than many people understand. I wish more young builders grasped how much content changes the economics of a business once it becomes truthful and sustained. I do not mean content as vanity. I do not mean becoming an influencer because applause feels warm. I mean content as documented proof of thought, experience, progress, taste, and competence. The internet is full of noise. That is why signal gets rewarded when it appears consistently. A person who builds in public intelligently creates trust at scale. Trust at scale is a very valuable asset. It makes selling easier. It makes recruiting easier. It makes opportunities arrive that pure cold outreach never would have produced. Most people postpone content because they think they need to be polished first. If you wait until you feel polished, you will often wait until someone less polished, but more consistent already owns the room. Begin honestly, continue relentlessly. Let time handle polish. That is how most things worthwhile are built anyway. Now, let me address the biggest emotional objection. This all sounds like it takes too long. Of course it takes time. What else did you think real leverage looked like? The world spoiled people with screenshots. It made them believe that because a story can be consumed in 60 seconds, a life can be built in 60 seconds too. That is nonsense. The hockey stick comes after the flat years. That is one of the oldest truths in enterprise. You do not get a giant outcome without a long stretch where almost nobody around you can see what you are trying to build. That is why commitment matters so much. And by commitment, I do not mean romantic intensity for 6 days. I mean what I said earlier, 1,000 days, one path, one strong skill, one clear market, one meaningful result, one compounding system, and enough maturity not to restart every time another shiny thing passes your face. The person who can do that in 2026 has a tremendous edge because distraction is now industrialized. Most people do not need better opportunities. They need protection from endless interruption. That is why I think the winners are not just the people with better ideas. They are the people with better filters. Better filters keep you out of the garbage. Better filters keep you focused long enough for the middle bucket to become real. Better filters stop you from romanticizing income before you have built assets. Better filters remind you that the hard bucket must be earned, not fantasized. And if I compress the entire thing into the shortest sentence I can defend, it would be this. Start by selling value, then systematize value, then own value. That is the path. Sell value to learn the market. Systematize value to gain leverage. Own value to create wealth. The public tries to skip straight to wealth while avoiding the apprenticeship. That is why it stays broke and resentful. I have never liked resentment. Resentment is what people feel when they want the result while refusing the process. The process matters, it always has. So if I were a young person today, staring at the internet and wondering which road still works, I would not ask what looks hottest. I would ask which path moves me from time to systems to assets. The answer is not glamorous. It is also one of the most valuable answers I know. Avoid garbage, use the easy bucket to get paid, use the middle bucket to become strategically useful. Use the hard bucket to build or buy machines, commit for 1,000 days. Publish the journey, stay with the lane long enough for compounding to reveal itself. And remember the main thing, most people still refuse to learn. You can do many things in life. You cannot do everything at once and still build depth. Depth is where advantage lies. Advantage is where economics improve. Economics are where freedom comes from. That is the chain. I would follow it. I still would, because the internet changes tools quickly. The laws of leverage, ownership, customer value, and compounding do not change nearly as fast. Build around those laws, and you have a chance, ignore them, and you can stay very busy for a very long time without ever truly getting stronger. I have no interest in staying busy without getting stronger. And I do not think you should either